Have you ever stopped to consider exactly when the deafening roar of teenage hysteria died down? Just enough for the musicians on stage to actually hear themselves think, allowing the very fabric of popular music to tear open and reveal a harmonic complexity previously reserved for smoky jazz cellars and rigid classical concert halls? That precise fracture in the timeline of cultural history, the exact moment the tectonic plates of the industry shifted from commerce to art, is Rubber Soul. If you are searching for the point where boy meets girl transmuted into man confronts the void, you have arrived. We are not discussing a mere collection of catchy 45s here. We are dissecting the pivot point of the 20th century. As a musician who has spent decades bleeding over fretboards, obsessing over the structural architecture of King Crimson and the harmonic density of Yes, I often witness the uninitiated dismiss the Beatles as entry-level fluff, the gateway drug of rock and roll. That is an amateur's mistake, a fatal error in judgment. To truly comprehend the architectural triumph of this record, you must strip away the mythology, forget the mop tops, and listen to the wood, the wire, the vacuum tubes, and the electricity with the critical ears of a producer. This album is not cute. It is a musical coup d'etat. Let us be brutally honest about the state of the music industry in late 1965. It was a factory line, a meat grinder designed to chew up talent and spit out profit. You wrote a hit. You recorded it in 3 hours between interviews. You toured until you collapsed in a hotel room, and you repeated the cycle until the public got bored and moved on to the next pretty face. The Beatles were trapped in this cycle, suffocating. But Rubber Soul is the sound of 4 men jamming a wrench into the gears. This is the sound of fatigue transforming into innovation. They were smoking a significant amount of marijuana. Let's not sanitize history, as the distinct lack of adrenaline and the massive increase in textural depth on this record is directly correlated to their herbal intake. And they were listening to Stax Soul Records and the introspective folk of Bob Dylan. They decided, perhaps out of sheer boredom with the formula, or perhaps out of artistic desperation, to turn the recording studio from a capture device into a compositional instrument. When you drop the needle on Drive My Car, the first element that should assault you, if you possess any appreciation for the physics of sound, is the bottom end. Up until this point, British pop records were often trebly thin affairs, mixed specifically to cut through the low-fidelity speakers of transistor radios. But here, Paul McCartney and the engineers at Abbey Road, specifically the unsung hero Norman Smith, decided to let the bass guitar breathe, to let it dominate the lower frequencies. That driving riff is not a support beam, it is the hook itself. It is heavy, it is syncopated, and it owes more to the grit of Memphis soul than it does to Liverpool skiffle. There is a dirt to it, a saturation that comes from pushing the input gain on the console. Look at the arrangement. It is sparse. They are no longer hiding behind a wall of sound. It is dry. The lack of reverb on Rubber Soul is startling compared to the wash of noise on American records of the time. It is intimate, claustrophobic even. It sounds like they are playing inside your skull, not in a cavern. The piano solo is not a display of virtuosity, but a rhythmic statement, hammering specifically on the offbeats, creating a jagged propulsion that forces the listener to move. But the true technical brilliance begins to show its face when you examine the harmonic language utilized on Norwegian wood. This bird has flown. The casual listener hears a nice acoustic number. The seasoned musician hears a radical departure from Western pop tradition. George Harrison introduces the sitar. Yes, but do not make the mistake of thinking this is just exotic window dressing or a gimmick. Functionally, the sitar is operating as a drone, grounding the song in a mixolydian modal feel that fights against the standard major-minor duality of radio pop. The melody is circular, hypnotic, refusing to resolve the way your ear expects. It hangs in the air. The lyric is a story of an affair, cryptic and cynical, ending in arson. This is not, I want to hold your hand. This is, I'm going to burn your house down because you made me sleep in the bath. It is dark, mature, and structurally fascinating because the melody floats over a static harmonic root, creating tension without traditional chord movement. The acoustic guitars are compressed heavily, bringing up the attack of the pick against the strings, making the instrument sound percussive, almost violent in its strumming pattern. Then we arrive at the absolute masterclass in counterpoint and harmonic rhythm that is Michel. McCartney is often accused by the ignorant of being the soft Beatle, the balladeer. Rubbish. The man is a musical shark with teeth. Michel features a descending chromatic bassline that is straight out of the jazz lexicon, reminiscent of the sophisticated voice leading found in the work of Joe Beam or the Great American Songbook. He is walking the harmony down in half steps, creating a tension and release that is tragic. The chords, F minor moving to C but traversing through augmented and diminished passing tones, demonstrate a knowledge of voice leading that most rock musicians simply did not possess. He wasn't just strumming block chords, he was composing internal melodies within the chord progression itself. And the solo? It is restrained, melodic, and serves the song, not the ego. It outlines the melody, reinforcing the motif rather than trying to obliterate it with speed. We must discuss the rhythm section because Ringo Starr endures more disrespect than any drummer in history, and it makes my blood boil. If you cannot hear the genius of Ringo on Rubber Soul, you are listening for flash, not feel. You are listening for mathematics, not groove. Ringo is the king of the pocket. On the word, the groove is loose, swinging, almost dragging behind the beat, anticipating the psychedelic funk that would take over later in the decade. The interaction between the kick drum and the bass guitar is telepathic. This is where the concept of the rhythm section in rock solidifies, not as timekeepers, but as the engine of the song's texture. The word is also notable for its harmonium drone and the D7-9 chord, the Hendrix chord, used as a stab of dissonance before Hendrix made a career out of it. They were pushing the tonal envelope, looking for sounds that grated against the ear in a pleasing way. The modulation in the word is not just a key change. It is a shift in consciousness, a brightness that lifts the track before dropping it back into the heavy, one-chord groove. Consider the sonic texture of Nowhere Man. This is a vocal arrangement that rivals the Beach Boys, yet it possesses a bite that the California sound often lacked. The trebly, biting tone of the guitars, sonic blue Stratocasters likely run through AC30s with the treble booster cranked, creates a chime that is instantly recognizable. But structurally, look at how the song begins. A cappella, three-part harmony. No count-in, no drum fill. They had the confidence to start a pop song with naked vocals. That requires pitch-perfect execution. In the studio, double-tracking vocals became a standard texture here. They weren't just singing. They were thickening the signal, creating a chorus effect naturally by layering takes. It gives the voice a supernatural presence, detached from the reality of a single human throat. The solo is a unison line played by George and John, requiring immense discipline to execute without phasing issues. It cuts through the mix like a laser. One cannot discuss Rubber Soul without addressing the elephant in the room. The fuzz bass on Think for Yourself. George Harrison wrote the song, but Paul McCartney's decision to run his Rickenbacker bass through a tone-bender fuzz box was revolutionary. A bass guitar was traditionally supposed to be felt, not heard as a buzzing, angry hornet. By distorting the low end, they occupied a frequency range that was usually left empty or filled by rhythm guitars. It added a menacing, aggressive texture to a song that is lyrically about rejecting someone else's dogma. The sound matches the sentiment perfectly. That is artistic cohesion. It is a texture that prog rock bands would abuse for the next decade. Think of Chris Squire or John Wetton. But here it is, tight, controlled, and serving the composition. The fuzz line doesn't just rumble, it snarls, acting as a lead instrument in its own right. Then we arrive at the crown jewel, In My Life. If you want to understand the difference between a songwriter and a composer, you study this track. The structure is deceptively simple, but the emotional weight is carried by the intervals. The melody leaps and falls with a grace that suggests Baroque music. And the solo? It sounds like a harpsichord, but it isn't. It is a piano, played by George Martin. The brilliance lies in the production technique. The part was too technically difficult to play with the correct feel at full speed. So Martin recorded it at half speed, an octave lower. When they sped the tape back up during the mix, the pitch rose to the correct octave, and the timbre of the piano changed. The attack became sharp, brittle, and staccato, mimicking a harpsichord. This is the studio as a laboratory. They were manipulating time and physics to get a sound that did not exist in the room. That is the spirit of progressive rock, using technology to transcend the limitations of human performance. The drum pattern on this track is also a study in minimalism, a simple heartbeat that never intrudes, allowing the melody to float. There is a roughness to Rubber Soul that its successor, Sgt. Pepper, lacks. Sgt. Pepper is a polished masterpiece. Rubber Soul is a band discovering they can do anything. Listen to I'm Looking Through You. You can hear the feedback, the slight imperfections, the anger in McCartney's vocal. It is organic. It is folk rock with teeth. The acoustic guitars are percussive, driven hard. They aren't gently finger-picking, they are attacking the strings. This aggression, juxtaposed with the sweetness of the melodies, creates a friction that keeps the listener on edge. Ringo plays organ stabs on this track, adding a chaotic texture that fleshes out the arrangement without cluttering it. Let us not ignore the tracks that lesser critics might dismiss as filler, which on any other band's album would be career-defining singles. Wait features volume pedal swells on the guitar, a technique that would become a staple of psychedelic rock and later ambient music. The dynamic shifts between the verse and the chorus are drastic, moving from a tentative minor key plea to a driving major key assertion. Girl features a sharp intake of breath as a rhythmic device, a sound of desire and exhaustion. These are microscopic details, but a true musician knows that the devil is in the details. The backing vocals on Girl are essentially a dirty joke, proving that despite their high art aspirations, they were still lads from Liverpool taking the piss. But musically, the Greek-influenced acoustic guitar runs in the outro of Girl Show, a willingness to pull from world music textures long before it was fashionable. The high E string acts as a pedal point while the melody weaves around it, a technique borrowed from the bouzouki. The production of Rubber Soul is dry, tight, and compressed. This compression is key. It squeezes the instruments together, making them punch as a single unit. Modern production is often too separated, too clean, too sterile. Rubber Soul has glue. The leakage, the sound of the drums bleeding into the vocal mic, the guitar amp bleeding into the drum overheads, creates an ambient signature that you cannot fake with digital plugins. It sounds like four guys in a room, but four guys who have evolved beyond their peers. The stereo separation, often criticized in modern times for having vocals on one side and instruments on the other, actually allows for a forensic listening experience. You can isolate the interplay. You can hear the pick hitting the string. You can hear the intake of breath. We must also consider If I Needed Someone. Here, Harrison channels the Byrds, who were channeling the Beatles, creating a feedback loop of influence. The chiming 12-string Rickenbacker riff is pure geometry. It relies on syncopation, playing against the beat. The vocal harmonies are stacked in a way that creates a wall of sound, dense and impenetrable. It is a drone disguised as a pop song. The bass line here is melodic, moving constantly, providing a counter-melody to the guitar riff. This creates a dense polyphony that engages the brain as much as the foot. Run for Your Life, often maligned for its lyrics, is musically a tight, country-influenced rocker. Listen to the guitar work. It is rockabilly on steroids. The bending of the strings, the slide into the notes. It shows that George Harrison had mastered the American vernacular of the guitar. The track drives hard, ending the album not with a ballad, but with a threat. It leaves the listener unsettled. You Won't See Me is another marvel of endurance. It is long for a pop song of that era. The piano drives it, unrelenting. The backing vocals, ooh la la la, are persistent, almost nagging, mirroring the lyrical theme of being ignored. The bass is high in the mix, melodic, almost doing the job of a lead guitar. McCartney's vocal performance is strained, pushing the upper limit of his chest voice, adding a sense of urgency and frustration that a cleaner take would have missed. You must understand, before this album, The LP was a marketing tool to sell 2 hits and 10 covers. Rubber Soul was a cohesive artistic statement. The cover art, distorted, stretched, shot from below, told you everything you needed to know. Their reality was warping. The music followed suit. They were shedding the skins of entertainers and becoming artists. As a progressive rock lover, I respect the virtuosity of a band like Rush or Dream Theater, but the economy of notes on Rubber Soul is a lesson every shredder needs to learn. Harrison doesn't play a million notes. He plays the right 3 notes. He understands that the space between the notes is as important as the notes themselves. His guitar work on this album is a study in taste. He serves the song, never the other way around. The engineering limitations of 1965 forced this creativity. They were working on 4-track tape machines. To add more layers, they had to bounce down, recording 3 tracks, mixing them onto the 4th, and then starting over on a fresh machine. Every time you bounce, you lose fidelity and increase tape hiss. This meant they had to commit to decisions early. There was no "we'll fix it" in the mix. If the balance wasn't right during the bounce, it was wrong forever. This imposed a discipline on the arrangement. Every part had to justify its existence. There was no room for clutter. This is why the album sounds so focused. It is the sound of decision. To listen to Rubber Soul is to hear the blueprint for the next 10 years of rock music. The vocal harmonies inspired the Beach Boys to make Pet Sounds, which in turn inspired the Beatles to make Sgt. Pepper. It is the catalyst. It is the moment the caterpillar liquefied in the chrysalis. It is messy, it is brilliant, and it is undeniably real. It demands that you listen not just to the melody, but to the texture, the interplay, and the daring innovation of 4 men who realized that the rules of pop music were just suggestions and decided to break every single one of them. If you are serious about music, you don't just like Rubber Soul. You study it. You analyze the modulation. You dissect the vocal stacking. You appreciate the dry thud of Ringo's snare, which sounds like a wooden box being hit with a dead fish, yet drives the track harder than a cannon. You appreciate the melodic invention of Paul's bass, which stopped being a rhythm instrument and became an orchestral voice. This is the Old Testament of art rock. Ignore it at your peril. The polished, auto-tuned, gridlocked nonsense that passes for music today shrivels and dies in the presence of the organic, timbre and wire majesty of this record. It is high time we stopped treating it as just oldies and recognized it for what it is. The architectural foundation of modern musical ambition. It is the dividing line between the music that entertains you and the music that changes you. And if you cannot hear that, if you cannot feel the seismic shift in those grooves, then you might as well pack up your instrument and go home, because you are missing the entire point of why we make music in the first place.